Imagine peering into a Moroccan cave, uncovering secrets frozen in time from 15,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Not just everyday remnants, but the bones of these huge birds, great bustards, found right alongside human burials.
It's an amazing picture, isn't it? A real glimpse into a very distant past.
And that's exactly what we're exploring today.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into this really fascinating discovery. The main source is a scientific paper from IBIS, the journal, and there's a helpful news article backing it up.
Right.
We're focusing on these late Pleistocene remains of great bustards found in the Grotte des Pigeons, that's the Cave of Pigeons in Morocco.
And specifically found on the same layers as human burials, which is key.
That's the crucial part.
So why does finding these specific bird bones in this context matter so much?
Well, for one, it gives us a much deeper understanding of the ancient cultures, that were thriving in the Maghreb back then.
Okay.
But maybe even more significantly, it really unveils a critical chapter in the story of the great bustard itself in Africa.
Especially considering they're, struggling so much today.
Precisely. They're endangered now. And this discovery, it really shifts our whole understanding of their presence in Morocco.
How so?
It basically confirms they weren't just recent arrivals blown over from Iberia or something.
Wow.
No, they were breeding residents there for millennia. We're talking at least 14,700 years ago.
Wow, okay. So that pushes their timeline way back.
It totally challenges the older ideas about when they even got to Africa.
And what really grabs me is the apparent relationship these ancient people had with the birds.
Right. It seems to go beyond just, hunting for a meal.
Yeah, the evidence points towards something more deliberate, maybe even ritualistic,
Yeah.
especially in a funerary setting.
That's what the findings strongly suggest. It's quite captivating.
So let's set the scene first. Where is this cave exactly?
Okay, so the Grotte des Pigeons, or Taforalt Cave, as it's also known, is in eastern Morocco. It's up in the Beni-Snassen Mountain range.
Okay, mountains.
Yeah, about 720 meters above sea level and roughly 40 kilometers inland from the Mediterranean coast. It's a site of huge archaeological importance.
And what makes this cave so special for digging into the past?
Well, two main things, really. Its age and the incredible preservation.
Right.
Human occupation there goes back, get this, at least 85,000 years.
85,000.
Yeah. And it's recognized as Africa's oldest identified cemetery. The conditions inside are just right for preserving things exceptionally well: bones, artifacts.
Okay, so a really significant site overall. And the Great Bustard remains, we're focusing on where exactly were they found within this big complex?
They came specifically from an area called Sector 10.
Sector 10, okay.
And this sector is directly associated with human burials from the later Stone Age. That's the Ibero-Mauritian culture. They were found within these layers that are really rich in ash.
Ash layers, interesting. And the timing.
The great bustard bones themselves have been directly radiocarbon dated. They clock in at around 14,700 years before present.
And that matches the human remains.
Perfectly. It overlaps precisely with the dates they got from the human remains found right there in Sector 10.
So, a specific time, a specific place, and intimately linked with how these people were treating their dead. It's quite a picture.
It really is.
Now, for anyone listening who might not have seen one, what does a great bustard actually look like? Are they really that great?
Well, yes, they are genuinely majestic birds. They're among the heaviest flying birds anywhere in the world.
Really? How heavy?
The males can be enormous, reaching up to 20 kilograms sometimes.
20 kilos. That's huge for a bird.
It really is. Think of a large turkey, maybe even bigger. Today, you find them across Iberia, a little bit in northwest Africa, and then stretching east into Asia.
But their current situation isn't so great, is it? You mentioned they're endangered.
No, it's quite concerning, sadly. They're classified as globally endangered. Populations have just plummeted across their range.
And the Moroccan ones?
They're in a particularly bad spot, critically endangered. The estimate is maybe only 72 to 78 birds left.
Wow, that few.
Yeah, and they're confined to just the Tangier Peninsula now. What's really interesting, too, is that genetically they're distinct from the bustards just across the water in Spain.
So they're unique.
Very unique. They are literally the last great bustard population left on the entire African continent.
And until this Taforalt discovery, we didn't really know how long they'd even been in Morocco.
Our understanding of their deep history there was pretty limited, yeah. These cave findings really start to fill in that long, long history.
So back to the cave, Sector 10. What exactly did the researchers pull out that pointed so clearly to these birds?
Well, in that specific sector, the team uncovered over 150 bird bones overall,
Okay.
representing at least 14 different bird species. But crucially, a really significant chunk of those were identified as great bustard.
Not just other birds.
No, a specific focus on bustards in that area.
Yeah.
And the direct radiocarbon dating on those bones pins them right around that 14,700 year mark.
That's very precise.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like one tiny fragment, right? They found more.
Oh yeah, definitely not just a single bone. They found a whole range of different skeletal parts.
Like what?
Bits from the beak, the premaxilla, and the mandible, the jaw. Then bones from the chest area, coracoids, the furcula or wishbone, the sternum, pelvic fragments, the ilium, and limb bones, humeri from the upper wing, ulna from the lower wing, femur from the thigh, tibiotarsus and tarsimetatarsus from the lower leg and foot.
So basically, parts from all over the bird's body.
Exactly. Which tells us they weren't just finding, say, wingtips brought in by predators. This indicates the presence of multiple, fairly complete individuals at the site.
What else could they tell from these ancient bones? Did they get any other details about the birds themselves?
Yeah, they did, actually. They got some really cool insights into the age structure of the population back then.
Oh?
They found bones belonging to juvenile birds, quite young ones, and also immature individuals.
Which suggests...
It strongly suggests that great bustards were actually breeding in the area around the cave during that period. They weren't just winter visitors or migrants passing through.
Ah, okay. They were residents.
Seems very likely, yes. And they could even tell the sex of some individuals.
How do they do that?
By comparing the size of these fossil bones really carefully with measurements from modern great bustard skeletons.
Right, because the males are much bigger.
Exactly. Males are significantly larger and heavier boned than females. So based on size, they could identify bones from both males and females in the cave remains.
Anything surprising there?
Well, interestingly, some of the male bones they found were actually larger than typical modern male specimens.
Bigger than today's bustards.
Potentially, yeah. Which leads into another point mentioned in the notes, this idea of Otis lombrechti.
Right, I saw that name. What's that about?
So in the past, paleontologists sometimes classified particularly large Pleistocene bustard fossils as a separate extinct species called Otis lombrechti.
Because they were so big.
Primarily, yes. But the current scientific thinking, which this research supports, is that size alone isn't really enough to define a whole separate species within great bustards. There's a lot of natural size variation.
Okay.
So, nowadays, Otis lombrechti is generally considered to be just a part of the spectrum of Otis tarda, the great bustard we know today. They're seen as synonymous.
Got it. So we have these numerous great bustard remains, males, females, young ones, right in this ancient cemetery area. What's the evidence that humans were actively doing something with them, not just found in the same dirt?
Right, and this is where it gets really compelling. The key evidence comes from marks on the bones themselves.
Marks, like tool marks.
Exactly. Many of the bustard bones, especially ones from the main body, the trunk elements and the upper parts of the wings, the proximal humeri, they show very clear cut marks.
Gut marks, made by stone tools.
That's the interpretation, yes. These look like classic signs of butchery. They indicate the birds were being processed, dismembered, likely by humans using stone tools.
Butchery marks. But at a burial site, that feels significant, more than just tossing away dinner scraps.
Precisely. It strongly suggests a deliberate action, something linked to the context. And there's even more direct evidence, potentially.
Oh, yeah. With that?
On one specific bone, it was a proximal right humerus, so the top part of the upper wing bone, they found these small puncture marks.
Punctures.
Yeah. And the researchers interpret these as a probable human bite mark.
A bite mark.
Seriously. It seems plausible. They think it was likely made by an upper canine tooth.
Wow.
And what makes it even more interesting is that we know the Ibero-Mauritian people who used this cave practiced something called tooth avulsion.
Tooth avulsion? What's that?
It's the intentional removal of teeth, usually the upper central incisors, the front teeth. It was a known cultural practice for them.
Okay.
So the fact that this puncture mark doesn't look like it was made by a flat incisor, but rather a pointed canine, kind of strengthens the argument that it could be a human bite mark from someone whose incisors might have been missing.
A human bite mark on a bird bone from 15,000 years ago. That is an incredibly direct link to these people. Amazing.
It really is quite evocative.
What about the types of bones found? You mentioned lots of different parts, but was there a pattern? Did that offer any more clues?
Yes, actually. The analysis showed that bones from the trunk, like the coracoid, sternum, Pelvis and the upper limb bones, the humori and femora, were more common.
Okay, the main body and upper limbs.
Right. Bones from the lower limbs and the very ends of the wings or feet were less frequent. Although the distal humerus, the lower end of that upper wing bone, was an exception, it was relatively common too.
What might that pattern mean?
It could point towards specific butchering practices. Maybe they were focusing on the meatiest parts, the breast and upper legs, and processing them differently. Or perhaps certain parts were carried away or used for other purposes we don't know about.
It suggests choices were being made.
Definitely. And reinforcing all this is the location. The fact that these bustard remains were found almost exclusively within the cemetery area, Sector 10, and not really scattered elsewhere in the cave's occupational layers.
Yeah, that seems critical.
It really implies a strong cultural connection, something beyond just basic food procurement.
Absolutely. It wasn't just random garbage disposal. It points to something deliberate tied to the burials.
Exactly. It strongly suggests their presence there was intentional and linked to the funerary context.
So if it's more than just food, what hints do we have about, well, a more symbolic or ritual significance? You mentioned feasting, maybe.
Yeah, the idea of ritual feasting seems quite plausible based on several lines of evidence.
Like what?
Well, first, you have the butchered, bustard remains found literally within the burial pits themselves and also in the soil deposits immediately next to them.
Okay, directly associated.
Very directly. And then there's a particularly striking find, a cut-marked sternum, the breastbone, from a very, very large male great bustard.
The big one you mentioned earlier.
Likely one of those very large males, yes. And this sternum was found positioned right at the feet of a human burial that's been interpreted as being high status.
At the feet of an important person.
Yeah, that strongly suggests it was placed there intentionally, perhaps as a specific food offering for that individual in the afterlife.
That's powerful evidence for ritual behavior.
It really is. And you also have to consider the effort involved.
What do you mean?
Great bustards, they like open country, grasslands, steppes. That wasn't the immediate environment right around the cave, which was more mountainous, remember?
Right, 40 kilometers from the coast up in the hills.
Exactly. So these Ibero-Mauritian people would have had to make a specific effort to go out hunting these large, wary birds in the plains nearby, kill them, and then haul these heavy carcasses back up to the cave.
That's a significant investment of time and energy.
It absolutely is, which suggests these birds weren't just everyday snacks. They were likely considered special foods.
Reserved for important occasions, perhaps, like funerals.
Precisely. That seems very likely. The fact that great bustard remains appear repeatedly in multiple graves isn't just a one-off. It points towards a recurring, culturally significant behavior.
A tradition, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. A tradition perhaps linked specifically to funeral rites, maybe involving communal feasting as part of the burial ceremony.
And the different ages of the birds found? The young ones?
That adds another layer. Finding bones from both juveniles and immatures suggests hunting wasn't just happening in one specific season.
Ah, because young birds are different sizes at different times of year.
Exactly. It implies hunting might have occurred at various points throughout the year, which could potentially align with burial events happening whenever they occurred, not just seasonally.
It paints such a vivid picture of these ancient communities, their beliefs, their connection to the landscape and its animals.
It really does open a window into their world.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit.
Yeah.
What does this discovery tell us more broadly about the great bustard's own history and distribution in this whole region, the biogeography?
From that perspective, this finding is really quite significant for bird history, too.
How so?
Well, it provides concrete proof that great bustards were breeding residents in the Maghreb, North Africa, during the late Pleistocene.
And much earlier than we thought.
Much earlier, yes. And also importantly, further east than their tiny remnant range in Morocco today. Their historical range was clearly much wider.
So they weren't always just clinging to that little spot near Tangier.
Definitely not. This discovery fits nicely into the bigger picture of how animal and bird distributions shifted during the ice ages.
Okay.
Like many other species from the Palearctic region, basically Europe and northern Asia, the great bustard likely shifted its range southwards during the colder glacial periods.
Moving into warmer areas.
Exactly. Into the semi-arid steppe and grassland habitats that became more suitable further south, like in the Maghreb.
And the timing here fits that. 14,700 years ago.
It does. Interestingly, that specific time, around 14,700 years ago, corresponds with archaeological evidence suggesting a period of increasing climatic humidity in that region.
So Maybe better conditions for grasslands.
Potentially, yes. Better conditions for the kind of habitat these birds need.
And was the environment right around Taforalt suitable back then, even though the cave is in the mountains?
That's a good question. While the cave itself is in a mountainous zone, the researchers point out that suitable open grassland plains were actually located relatively close by.
How close?
Within about 10 or 11 kilometers, so certainly within hunting range.
Okay, accessible then.
Yes. And the proof is also in the pudding, so to speak. They found remains of other animals in the same cave layers that also love grasslands.
Like what?
Things like ostrich, hartebeest, even rhinoceros, and various types of bovids like ancient cattle or buffalo.
Wow, quite the ecosystem.
Definitely. Finding those alongside the bustards really strengthens the idea that suitable open habitats were available nearby, supporting this whole suite of grassland species.
It's amazing how all these different pieces, the bird bones, the human burials, the other animal remains, the climate data, all slot together to build this picture of the past.
That's the beauty of interdisciplinary archaeological science.
Okay, so bringing this right up to the present day now,
Yeah.
how do these ancient findings, this deep history, connect with the really precarious situation of the great bustard in Morocco today? You said they're critically endangered
Yeah, this is where the past really informs the present, and it's a vital connection to make.
because their decline is so drastic now.
It's incredibly drastic worldwide, really, but especially for this unique Moroccan population. And the decline is almost entirely down to human activities.
What kind of activities?
Primarily, it's habitat loss grasslands being converted to intensive agriculture. Also, hunting has historically been a huge problem, and disturbance from human infrastructure and activity.
And the Moroccan population, being genetically distinct, is particularly vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. If they disappear, that unique genetic heritage is gone forever. There's a very real risk of extinction for Africa's last great bustards.
It's quite sobering, isn't it, to think that this exact region where these birds were clearly thriving 15,000 years ago and were important enough to be part of burial rituals.
Now barely supports a few dozen individuals. It's a stark contrast.
Yeah, the Taforalt findings show unequivocally that the great bustard was once widespread, it was successfully breeding there, it was a significant part of the ecosystem and the culture.
Exactly. And there's even that hint with the very large male sternum found in that high-status grave.
Right, the offering.
It could perhaps be interpreted as an early form of targeting large, impressive males, maybe trophy hunting, in a sense, which is, ironically, still a factor that contributes to their decline in some parts of the world today.
So, a really long history of human interaction, though obviously the scale and nature of the threats have changed dramatically.
Hugely different scale today, yes. But the long thread of human influence is undeniable.
Is there any hope that understanding this deep history could actually help their conservation now?
Well, that's certainly the hope of the researchers involved in this study. They explicitly state that.
What's their thinking?
Their hope is that by highlighting this really deep historical connection, by showing how culturally important these birds were to the ancestors of modern Moroccans, it might help raise public awareness.
Get people more invested in protecting them.
Exactly. Build more public support for the current conservation efforts that are underway. They actually draw a parallel to another conservation success story in Morocco, the northern bald ibis, another unique and endangered bird. Its conservation in Morocco has been relatively successful, and a big part of that success was attributed to increased public awareness and engagement.
Ah, so maybe learning that great bustards were valued by their ancestors could inspire similar action today.
That's the idea. Recognizing that deep heritage might provide that extra motivation, that cultural connection needed to really get behind the efforts to save Africa's last great bustards.
It's a powerful thought, using the ancient past to try and secure a future.
Absolutely. It connects conservation directly to cultural identity.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the Grotte des Pigeons and these incredible finds, what would you say is the single most important insight we should take away from it all?
I think the key takeaway for me is the sheer depth and complexity of the relationship between these ancient human communities in Morocco and the great bustard.
Going way beyond just predator and prey.
Way beyond. It clearly wasn't just about sustenance. These massive birds held real ritual and cultural significance woven right into their most sacred practices, like burying their dead.
Yeah, it really hammers home the long, rich history of the great bustard in North Africa. A history we only really appreciate now thanks to archaeological evidence like this.
Absolutely. It gives them a tangible presence stretching back millennia in that landscape.
And it really does draw a direct line from that ancient reverence, however different it was, to the urgent need for conservation action today.
It does. It feels like we almost have a responsibility, knowing this history, to prevent the disappearance of a species that was clearly so important ecologically and culturally for such a long time.
A really compelling message from the past. As we think about this ancient relationship, it really makes you wonder, what can we, in our very different modern world, learn from that kind of deep connection? How can we better value and protect the biodiversity that still surrounds us?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Maybe, as a start, looking into the current conservation projects for great bustards in Morocco might be worthwhile for listeners. Seeing how people are trying to safeguard these magnificent birds today.
A great suggestion. Connect the past to present action.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this fascinating story from the Taforalt cave.
My pleasure. It's an incredible piece of research.